Hello, everybody on YouTube or wherever else this may end up. Welcome back to another edition of the comprehensive yet informal study of Kant's modern philosophy masterwork, Critique of Pure Reason. Woo! Patrick and Harrison are here today. Let me get back to the beginning of this thing we're going to be doing today. Today we're going to be doing the general remarks on the Transcendental Aesthetic. So there's this section, and then there's just at the very end, conclusion of the Transcendental Aesthetic. So I'm hoping to tackle both. We might not get there. We'll see. We'll play it by ear, as Patrick and I were talking about before we started this recording. We'll see how we fare through this. Do we have any preliminary remarks before we begin, or shall we just...
Let's eschew the preliminary remarks. We have a lot to get through.
Cool. Who wants to start reading?
It would be necessary to explain as distinctly as possible our opinion in regard to the fundamental constitution of sensible cognition in general, in order to preclude all misinterpretation of it. We have therefore wanted to say that all our intuition is nothing but the representation of appearance, that the things that we intuit are not in themselves what we intuit them to be, nor are their relations so constituted in themselves as they appear to us, and that if we remove our own subject, or even only the subjective constitution of the senses in general, then all constitution, all relation of objects in space and time, indeed, space and time themselves would disappear. And as appearances, they cannot exist in themselves, but only in us. Holy run-on.
Yeah.
What may be the case with objects in themselves, and abstracted from all this receptivity of our sensibility, remains entirely unknown to us. We are acquainted with nothing except our own way of perceiving them, which is peculiar to us, and which therefore does not necessarily pertain to every being, though to be sure it pertains to every human being. We are concerned solely with this. Space and time are its pure forms, sensation in general its matter. We can cognize the former only... We can cognize only the former a priori, i.e., to all actual perception, and they are therefore called pure intuition. The latter, however, is that in our constitution that is responsible for it being called a posteriori cognition, i.e., empirical intuition. The former adheres to our sensibility absolutely necessarily. Whatever sort of sensations we may have, the latter can be very different. Even if we could bring this intuition of ours to the highest degree of distinctness, we would not thereby come any closer to the constitution of objects in themselves. For in any case, we would still completely cognize only our own way of intuiting, i.e., our sensibility. And this always only under the conditions originally dependent on the subject, space and time, that what the objects may be in themselves would still never be known through the most enlightened cognition of their appearance, which alone is given to us.
Cool.
Ridiculous.
To be
That's
honest,
just so poorly written.
that is so poorly written, but it's relieving because at first I was intimidated by this huge fucking paragraph, but then
it's very easy to
It's very simple. Do you want to come around? I have this pulled up on the screen, so I don't know if you want to read along.
It's so mind-numbingly simple,
yes.
and he
There's
did
a
not
wall
need
of
to
text.
do that.
Yeah,
He did not need to do that. All he's literally saying is what he's already said, which is that we don't know anything about things in themselves because
their appearances.
we basically have the laws of our own sensibility, right? Everything is filtered through the lens of space and time,
Which are pure intuition.
and our
pure
five
intuition.
senses, or the conditions of our sensation in general, And however well we investigate, or however far we
However
clarify,
enlightened we are. That's so funny.
yeah,
Even the most enlightened of cognition of that appearance, which is the
just meaning no matter
no matter how fucking smart you are, you're never gonna get the
no matter how distinct color vision you have, you're not gonna see ultraviolet. Right, that's all he's saying. It's like
not yet. I think he's saying something further. I think he's saying you're never going to see sure.
Yeah, well, you're never going to see
That's
anything which is outside of your possible experience.
Yeah,
that's all. I mean, he really didn't.
Well, because he holds the thing in itself to be outside of the experience, which is an important assumption that we need to acknowledge. I think it's not just
right.
Oh, there's a thing that we can know of, but just not empirically experience. No, he's saying you're never going to in any way access the thing in itself. Specifically, here is talking about.
Well, unless your constitution would be changed.
What's constitution?
Meaning, the thing that you are.
Yeah, how we have some stuff written on the board. It's how this works. This is our constitution.
So, for instance, Kant leaves open the idea of a God with basically absolute power. Of course, such a God could alter the basic constitution of human beings.
He actually says something like that here. He says, and which therefore does not necessarily pertain to every being, though to be sure it pertains to every human being. So human beings are particularly limited in this way, or at least that we're constituted in this way.
Yeah.
But he says he does open up the possibility in this sentence here. It doesn't necessarily pertain to every being. So so there's the possibility there is another being that could be constituted in a different way that either intuits things differently and thus it has experience differently, or maybe they are some, like Patrick said, ultra powerful being that actually can cognize the thing itself.
Yeah.
That's really all he's saying in this big ass wall of text.
Why does he say that we can't categorize as you said it's not just that. Why is it not that it's just the empirical that's only limited? Why is our judgment also limited?
We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
He's not talking about anything about
categories. This is about intuitions. So are you asking why intuitions can get
I guess because you said it was he's saying something further than you just can't. It's not that we're just not empirically experiencing it. We can never access the thing in itself. What does that mean?
So that's saying that no matter what intuition we receive, it's always going to... Well, it's no matter what object, transcendental, thing in itself, object we receive, it's always going to be filtered through into even pure intuitions.
Okay.
Pure intuitions still are a filter to the pure thing in itself. We're never going to... He's basically saying we're constituted in such a way that we always have a filter.
There could be something that even transcends the concept of space and time.
Right.
Yes. Well, Kant does think there. He says that's what he calls the thing in itself. The transcendental object, I think, is what... We'll figure out later if that's the exact word, but you could think of it in that way right now, at least with the language being given to us at this point in the text. There's a transcendental object that is the thing in itself. It's the object, the metaphysically real thing, but it always gets filtered.
Yeah. So
this is why some people find Kant very depressing, because we can't ever intuit it, and as we'll see, we can't ever cognize it through our concepts either, because the concepts aren't the thing in itself either. For Kant, which we'll get to later on in the logic.
I'm sorry to hop on this tonight.
No, you're good.
As far as I imagine he has something to say about this, but what about my ability to imagine, to conceptualize a thing without space and time? Or would he say that I'm not actually doing that?
Yeah.
I'm just pretending to do that.
Probably. Yeah.
He would say that you are basically playing with concepts that are empty. Empty. Meaning that you don't know that they have any kind of correlate in experience.
Yes.
Right? But also simply that it can amount to a meaningless play of words because you're not actually able to richly have...
You're not able to map it to an intuition, basically. You can have the concept of, sure, I'm transcending...
You can't actually experience what you're talking about. Yeah. And therefore, what are the words you're saying even referring to? It's a meaningless play of forms, basically.
I guess so.
Empty concept, the intuition.
I guess then what he describes, because if that play of words were to be saying that if I were to simply imagine a universe where there is no time, that's just a thing where everything is frozen.
It's he's you can't even accurately imagine that.
But you're not actually imagining. Yeah. If you do such a thing, you're imagining your own subjective experiencing time, and you just imagine
I'm imagining what I empirically think a lack of time would be.
Yes, which is not.
But it requires time.
Exactly. You're never truly going to get away from it.
Yeah.
The closest you can get.
It requires time to do it in the first place.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You can't ever escape that.
So if I were to imagine, if I try to do some picture thinking of what a frozen universe looks like, my own consciousness does not freeze,
Of course, yes.
right? So I have an internal experience of succession.
Yes.
If that's the case, then there still is time in this universe. It's just that everything is standing still, which is, of course, a possible experience.
Yes.
Also, it's not the entire universe I'm experiencing because I can't comprehend infinity or all things in themselves.
Yes,
it's just
a block.
right. All I could really see is a field of vision for me, which has a bunch of still stuff.
Yeah.
Which is not a frozen universe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a universe without
You can
time.
try to get the intuitions to map the concepts, but you're never actually going to get there. The closest you can get
It's
is
kinda
uttering
like, it's
or
kinda like you can
cognitive.
get close, but there is a limit.
You can
never
posit
get
the
to it.
concepts basically, and that's the closest you're going to
Well,
get.
he doesn't think it's any closer, right? Because if we're thinking of a true absence of time, right, that's not just an absence of particular change in particular empirical objects.
Yeah.
That's saying that some objects remain the same is
Yeah.
no closer to the absence of time
Yeah.
because of your own internal
Yeah.
succession. So you're not getting any closer in terms of an absence of time, and
Yeah.
you're not getting any closer to comprehending a full universe because, if
All you're
if
doing is
said universe
positing
is
an empty
infinite.
concept. Basically.
All you're doing, you're positing an empty concept, and your correlate in imagination is something that does not match the concept.
Yes.
Which is why it's an empty concept. It can't do that. All right.
Is there,
Good. What's up?
I guess this isn't related, but is there anyone who comes after Kant that
Oh yeah.
doesn't necessarily say that? Well, I know it doesn't say that those things are empty, but that those things maybe do have that there is something there. Maybe not.
No, not that I know of. In terms of that
what are we
specific,
talking about? That there is something there.
I don't know. I guess,
like where you can actually,
Like, when we say empty, like what do we mean by is like this
Meaning an
this
intuition
whole
can't
waste
be
of
mapped
time
to
kind
it.
of thing to do this thing. Or that?
just meaning an intuition can't be mapped to it.
Okay.
It's kind of just like a meaningless word. I don't know if there are philosophers that would argue with that. I mean, maybe,
I think
probably.
Hegel does. Do you not think Hegel does? Based
Not
on my reading.
Not in this case. I don't think Hegel would say it's possible to actually experience
maybe
a
not
timeless.
possible, but to say that it's like empty.
No, it's not possible to have that kind of rich cognition of timelessness. Instead, what he's saying is that the play of reason, right, which is like the categories extended
Yeah.
beyond the understanding, beyond picture thinking,
Yeah.
right? Basically, he would say that does yield, right, knowledge of some kind.
Yes,
Yeah.
he would say that. But I thought you were saying the specific example of like a still universe. I don't think he would buy into. I mean, okay, he might.
Well, he
he
wouldn't
might say
say that.
that's something more than just an empty concept. He might we could posit that as some I don't know, concept that would dialectically interplay
Well,
with.
yeah, according to Hegel, any question you're ever going to ask is part of the dialectical necessary play.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's more
Yeah.
important. It's way more important in Hegel than it is in Kant.
Which is kind of
But he wouldn't agree that, or he wouldn't just straight up say like, oh yeah,
Oh, of
it's
course,
just
yeah.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if there's still.
Yeah. So
there's
there's
more to do with that.
there is for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
In Hegel and maybe others. Don't know. I don't know too many others. I don't know what Fichte would say about that. Honestly. Don't know what Schelling would say. This is probably what Hegel would say.
Why don't we move forward?
Yes, we can
Yes.
get going now.
Would
Okay,
you like
good
to-
questions though. Yeah, I'll read the next bit. Do you want to look at this, or
Sure.
are you fine with this?
I'm fine with this, yeah.
Okay, so you can keep that. Okay, moving on. That our entire sensibility is nothing but the confused representation of things, which contains solely that which pertains to them in themselves. Oh, but only under a heap of marks and partial representations that we can never consciously separate from one another, is therefore a falsification of the concept of sensibility and of appearance that renders the entire theory of them useless and empty. Hang on, I might need to read that over. That was like a fucking huge run-on. Okay, so entire sensibility, nothing but confused representation. Okay, so that makes sense. Yes, there's a confused mess that we have to apply concepts to eventually, which contains solely that which pertains to them in themselves. Okay, so he's basically just
He's
saying
saying that isn't true.
Oh.
He's saying that the idea that our sensibility is nothing but a confused representation of things is a falsification of the concept of sensibility.
Oh, yes.
Because
there
rather
are,
than being a confused representation, space and time are orderly forms.
Oh yes, you're right. Okay, yes. So intuitions, yes, they're not just random things. Yes.
Right. Time is very, very not random.
Neither is space, as we
Exactly.
just which is why this is under the.
And
Okay.
that's how they order what would otherwise be a completely
Confused
jumbled mess.
Yes, there are filters for ordering. Yes, experience. Great. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, moving on. The difference between an indistinct and distinct representation is merely logical and does not concern the content. Without doubt, the concept of right that is used by the healthy understanding contains the very same things that the most subtle speculation can evolve out of it. Only in common and practical use is one not conscious of these manifold representations in these thoughts. Thus, one cannot say that the common concept is sensible and contains mere appearance, for right cannot appear at all. Rather, its concept lies in the understanding and represents the constitution, the moral so morally right is what he's talking about here, of actions that pertains to them in themselves. The representation of a body in intuition, on the contrary, contains nothing at all that could pertain to an object in itself, but merely the appearance of something and the way in which we are affected by it. And this receptivity of our cognitive capacity is called sensibility and remains worlds apart from the cognition of the object in itself, even if one might see through to the very bottom of it, which is meaning the appearance.
So what he's arguing against here is basically a broader rationalist trend, which really has roots all the way in Plato.
Yes, I was thinking that.
Yeah,
I was thinking
exactly.
it's Platonic
Right.
forms, basically.
It is the forms, but it also goes into Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Wolff. Right.
Leads into
it's this idea that when we have a direct sensible experience, this is only a confused representation of some kind of rationally interpretable idea, basically. So if I experience just an ordinary being, a square rock for some reason, right? That's an imperfect representation of a square, and Plato would also say it's an imperfect representation of like whatever colors it is, whatever density, right? And so this is a confused jumble relative to like these rationally understandable forms. And what Kant would say is no, there's no such thing. Not only is there no such thing as the forms,
there's
you
no
can't even
rationality.
cognize it.
Yeah.
Like you can't even like what's the correct
The
word?
understanding plays no role in this.
Yes, exactly. The understanding plays no role
They're completely
in
separate
in
faculties.
experiencing space, for instance, or in experiencing a color, right? It wouldn't make sense to talk about a form of those because those aren't judgments at all. So
They're just things that we receive.
right, exactly.
Which is why he puts an emphasis on receptivity somewhere in here. We just went over it, but yeah. Yes, right here. And this receptivity of our cognitive capacity is called sensibility, right? So sensibility is purely receptive. There's no Platonic thing going on here where we're like, yes, we can, rationally deduce these objects and then, form perfect and imperfect. No, there's no perfection that comes in here because there's no judgment. We just perceive them and then apply the judgment afterwards.
Right.
So the judgment isn't inherent to the object. Or not even just the object, not even into the intuition itself. So, yeah. I think that's all he's saying here,
Pretty
right?
much.
Because the right... because right is used by the healthy understanding, and that doesn't have any... Because that's a rational thing, that's not really an intuition, whereas body is a representation in intuition. So we can...
Not the pure concept of body, but rather
like
actual
the
bodies
intuition
existing.
of a body.
Yeah, actual bodies existing in space.
Yes. Okay, cool. Makes
So-
sense. Any questions on that? Cool. All right.
All right.
Moving on. Do you want to read this part, Harrison?
Sure.
Do you mind just scrolling along with this?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
The Leibnizian Wolffian philosophy has therefore directed all investigations of the nature and origin of our cognitions to an entirely unjust point of view in considering the distinction between sensibility and the intellectual as merely logical, since it is obviously transcendental and does not concern merely the form of distinctness or indistinctness, but its origin and content, so that though sensibility we do not cognize the constitutions of things in themselves merely indistinctly, but rather not at all. And as soon as we take away our subjective constitution, the represented object, with the properties that sensible intuitions attribute to it, is nowhere to be encountered, nor can it be encountered for it is just the subjective constitution that determines its form as appearance.
That's exactly what we just said.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think there's much anything new going on besides that he's name dropping the Leibnizian and Wolffian philosophy, which he's criticizing here for being confused because it's making the same mistake as the example we were out of with Plato. He's basically saying it makes the same mistake, right? Where he's like, it's confusing these faculties which have really nothing to do with each other in themselves, and as he'll talk about later, it's really like the apperception of the subject that really combines these things together.
Cool.
So we'll get there. Cool.
Let's keep going then.
Yes, there is much to go through. Do you want to?
We ordinarily distinguish quite well between that which is essentially attached to the intuition of appearances and is valid for every human sense in general, and that which pertains to them only contingently because it is not valid for the relation of sensibility in general, but only for a particular situation or organization of this or that sense. And thus one calls the first cognition that represents the object in itself, but the second one only in its appearance. This distinction, however, is only empirical. If one stands by it, as commonly happens, and does not regard that empirical intuition, as in turn mere appearance, as ought to happen, so that there is nothing to be encountered in it that pertains to anything in itself, then our transcendental distinction is lost, and we believe ourselves to cognize things in themselves, though we have nothing to do with anything except appearances evident anywhere in the world of sense, even in the deepest research into its objects. Thus we would certainly call a rainbow a mere appearance in a sun shower, but we would never call this rain the thing in itself. And this is correct, as long as we understand that the latter concept in a merely physical sense, as that which in universal experience and all different positions relative to the senses is always determined thus, and not otherwise in intuition. But if we consider this empirical object in general, and without turning to its agreement with every human sense, ask it whether it represents an object in itself, I'm going to go back and do the parentheses, whether it, not the raindrops, since these, as appearances, are already empirical objects, represents the object in itself, then the question of the relation of the representation to the object is transcendental. And not only these drops are mere appearances, but even their round form, indeed even the space through which they are nothing in themselves, but only mere modifications or foundations of our sensible intuition. The transcendental object, however, remains unknown to us.
Cool. So I think this is a big criticism of like Descartes and Locke, who tried to like find essential qualities or like primary qualities versus secondary.
Right.
I think
mainly
he's
Locke.
saying yes. So even the primary qualities, Locke made the mistake of calling the primary qualities like the qualities in themselves.
Right.
The
So
object.
for Locke, primary qualities include things like space, right? Space impenetrability, etc. So he's saying, no, this is not the Kantian primary secondary quality distinction, because, which we talked on earlier, didn't we?
Last time, yes.
Yeah. So we
I
talked
don't
about,
know if that was on recording or that we stopped recording at that point, but we definitely at some point.
we did touch on earlier this idea of like what is the difference between primary secondary quality distinction and phenomena noumena distinction.
Yeah. Right here.
Right here, the distinction is that for Locke, according to Locke, primary qualities are still something knowable in the sense of we know that there is space and time, etc., etc.
Yes,
So
as real metaphysical, like in themselves things. Kant's like, no, this is a mistake. Even things as seemingly pure, in themselves, as he says, like the form of the. He says like the form of
Space
the,
and
of the
time.
shape. Yeah,
Yeah, the roundness and the space
roundness,
itself.
Yes, he's even something seemingly as in itself and fundamental as that. Kant says that's still being filtered through the pure intuition of space and time. So he says we really don't get the thing ever in itself, unadulterated. And Locke and even like Descartes, I think, makes an argument with like the candle wax, right? He's like, there's still something like substantial about this, the essence.
That's sort of the seed of it.
Yeah, Kant's like, no, even that is mistaken. So Locke, Descartes, wrong for those reasons. Any is there anything else I'm missing? I don't think so, right? This is kind of a longer espousing of that idea, I think. Any questions about that?
No.
All right, we want to move on. Let's see. Continuing on, the second important concern of our transcendental aesthetic.
No, you should turn it the other way so that you can read it while facing the mic.
Based on scoot.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, good idea. Okay. The second important concern of our transcendental aesthetic is that it is not merely earn some favor as a plausible hypothesis, but that it be as certain and indubitable as can ever be demanded of a theory that is to serve as an organon. So this is a big fucking claim. He's like, this is absolutely like just, you can't doubt my theory at all. So all post-Kantians are horribly mistaken, and this is why pure like hardcore Kantians are like, oh, Hegel and Fichte and everybody else, they're just regressing to pre-critical philosophy, because this is known as Kant's critical philosophy. Well, this and the other two critiques are his system of critical philosophy. So Kant is kind of setting up that ground here. He's saying everyone that comes after me, well, he didn't know that. But
I don't know that Fichte or Hegel actually disagree with the transcendental aesthetic per se.
What is it?
Well, in the sense that they disagree definitely that we can't, that space and time, like, in itself are fundamentally like appearance. I do think that the big thing, at least in Hegel, I know, is knowing things in and for themselves.
Well, but that's because
they have cognitive access.
But that's because there is no distinction between in itself and
right, which is in the last paragraph and even the last two, right? Kant's kind of like stressing the importance of this.
Well,
and now he's saying
but that's not what we're. I don't think that what he's laying down as indubitable by this sentence is the.
Oh, you're right. I think I misread that. Okay.
I think what he's laying down as indubitable is the constitution of that space and time are elements of our own constitution.
Sure. Yes,
which
they would agree with that.
I find very hard to disagree with. Even when we brought it up to the A theory, B theory, they acknowledge that they're transcending our own subjective conception of space and time, which is all Kant is saying.
Oh, okay.
Right, but our subjective, he argues that we can't go any further than that. And other metaphysicians are gonna, like modern metaphysicians, of course, say that we can go further than that.
Yeah.
But Kant says.
Okay, so he's not really attacking his immediate follower; he's just attacking contemporary.
I mean, I'm sure some people will try to argue with it, but for my part, I think that you can't really doubt this idea that the subjective experience of time, which is what we most directly refer to when we refer to time, is an infinite given magnitude.
Yes. Sure. Okay. Well, if that's what he's saying, then yes, I agree. Cool. Let's continue. In order to make this certainty fully convincing, we will choose a case in which its validity can become obvious, and that can serve to make that which has been adduced in section 3 even more clear. I don't remember what that is, but we'll probably be reminded of it when he brings up this example. Oh, is he not going to give an example right here? Oh no, I guess.
No, this is just a weird way of starting his example.
Okay. Do you want to start with this?
Thus, if it were to be supposed that space and time are in themselves objective and conditions of the possibility of things in themselves, then it would be shown first that there is a large number of a priori, apodictic, and synthetic propositions about both, but especially about space, which we will therefore here investigate as our primary example. Since the propositions of geometry are cognized synthetically a priori and with apodictic certainty, I ask, whence do you take such propositions, and on what does our understanding rely in attaining to such absolutely necessary and universally valid truths? There is no other way than through concepts or through intuitions, both of which, however, are given as such, either a priori or a posteriori. The latter, namely empirical concepts, together with that on which they are grounded. Empirical intuitions cannot yield any synthetic propositions except one that is also merely empirical, i.e., a proposition of experience. Thus, it can never contain necessity and absolute universality of the sort. that is nevertheless characteristic of all propositions of geometry. Concerning the first, and only means for attaining to such cognition, however, namely through mere concepts or a priori intuitions, it is clear that from mere concepts, no synthetic cognition, but only merely analytic cognitions can be attained. Take the proposition that with two straight lines, no space at all can be enclosed. Thus, no figure is possible. And try to derive it from the concept of straight lines. And the number two, or take the proposition that a figure is possible with three straight lines. And in the same way, try to derive it from these concepts. All of your effort is in vain, and you see yourself forced to take refuge in intuition, and indeed, geometry always does. You thus give yourself an object, an intuition. But what kind is this? Is it pure, a priori intuition, or an empirical one? If it were the latter, then no universally valid.
Should be not. It's an editor's mistake, I think.
Then should not be universally valid, let alone apodictic.
Oh, then no universally valid, let alone apodictic proposition could ever
So
come.
that's just another adjective. Okay.
For experience can never provide anything of the sort. You must therefore give your object a priori in intuition and ground your synthetic proposition on this. If there did not lie in you a faculty for intuiting a priori, if this subjective condition regarding form were not at the same time the universal a priori condition under which alone the object of this outer intuition is itself possible, if the object, the triangle, were something in itself without relation to your subject, then how should you say that what necessarily lies in your subjective conditions for constructing a triangle must also necessarily pertain to the triangle in itself? For you cannot add to your concept of three lines something new, the figure that must thereby necessarily be encountered in this object, since this is given prior to your cognition and not through it. If therefore space and time as well were not a mere form of your intuition that contains a priori conditions under which alone things could be outer objects for you, which are nothing in themselves without these subjective conditions, then you could make out absolutely nothing synthetic and a priori about outer objects. It is therefore indubitably certain that not merely possible or even probable that space and time, as the necessary conditions of all outer and inner experience, are merely subjective conditions of all our intuition, and in relation to which therefore all objects are mere appearances, and not things given for themselves in this way. About these appearances, further, which may be said a priori, that concerns their form, but nothing whatsoever about the things in themselves that may ground them.
Woo! Thanks. That was
So the not being able to, the line examples,
uh-huh.
what's that deal with that?
So line examples. He's basically trying to paint the picture that you need intuitions. The pure intuitions are necessary to have like geometry. Basically, he's painting that picture in pretty.
Take the proposition that two straight lines never intersect, or two parallel straight lines never intersect.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? He says that you cannot get the non-intersecting judgment from the definition of either of these two parallel straight lines. Rather, we have to have recourse, he says. Rather, we have to turn to space.
Yeah, because if you have the definition of a line and a line, nothing about just a thing that goes straight says
Right.
that it wouldn't intersect with a thing.
Well, I mean,
maybe the definition of parallel, but
Yeah.
parallel invokes the.
but the thing is,
space.
parallel invokes the concept of a Euclidean plane,
Yeah.
and the Euclidean plane can never be conceptually defined.
Yes,
according to
that's
Kant.
an intuition.
Right, that is the intuition of space.
Yes.
Exactly. Euclid, if you actually read Euclid,
Have
there
you?
are axioms. Yeah, I read the beginning of it. So there are axioms in Euclid, which you just have to accept, and those axioms, according to Kant, are derived from pure intuition.
And something like how we said earlier, you can't imagine a universe that is just frozen. You'd say anytime they have an example of non-Euclidean geometry, you're just projecting onto like another surface that's also within Euclidean geometry.
No, that's not true because
No.
non-Euclidean geometry
It's part
is
of our
based on.
experience.
Yeah, no, non-Euclidean geometry is not that weird. Non-Euclidean geometry
It's just more complex.
No, you can. So, two straight lines don't intersect on a Euclidean plane because a Euclidean plane is two-dimensional. They
Oh, I
do
see.
intersect on on the surface of a sphere, for instance.
Well, yeah,
That's non-Euclidean geometry.
Euclidean geometry is only two-dimensional.
Yes.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's geometry on a plane. So non-Euclidean
Oh,
geometry
okay,
is.
then yeah, you can't.
Yes,
Okay.
it's not this four-dimensional weirdness that you think it is. Non-Euclidean geometry is just like if you have
It's a Cartesian plane, x and y coordinates.
But like when we do try to conceptualize 4 dimensions, it usually is because we're actually.
So when it
extrapolating
comes
off
to
of-
4 dimensions, you need to basically make a calculation that has ultimately recourse to 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
We can actually do 4-dimensional math,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's some kind of extrapolation from
Yeah.
3-dimensional math, and we don't directly experience any of the
Yeah,
axioms.
because then we're projecting it into 3-dimensional space.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just an extrapolation from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional because we can experience both the 2-dimensional geometry and 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
Then we further extrapolate that into 4-dimensional, but we never, of course, actually experience any 4-dimensional hyperspace.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, it's not a space which is different in kind from the kind of space we experience.
Yeah.
It's just an extrapolation that is mathematical of the space we experience.
Yeah.
4 or 5, however many spatial dimensions you want to include there. But basically, I had a couple of remarks here. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Yes. So this sort of demonstration here is valid as long as you accept the analytic synthetic distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Because it definitely seems obvious that you cannot get a universal proposition from an empirical intuition of space.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And as long as space is an object in itself and not our constitution, right? We would only have an empirical intuition of space.
Mm-hmm.
So space therefore does have to be something which is in our own constitution.
Yeah.
The only thing is this is a certain kind of space. And people can be talking about space that is not the kind of space we directly experience.
Yeah.
Or time that is not the kind of time we directly experience.
Yeah.
Which is what we went over with time, right?
Yeah.
There is certainly a subjective experience of time and a subjective experience of space. The question is can we infer properties about a thing in itself which causes that time?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like Ben basically posed to me, okay, so we subjectively experience change.
Yeah.
If that's the case, how could it possibly be that there is no change in the thing in itself?
Yeah.
So that's his argument for like
Objective.
the explanatory power of a
Transcendental.
thing in itself, right? A transcendent
Yeah.
conception of time.
Yeah.
And my answer is, how could you possibly know
Yeah.
that? And what would be the condition like? So I'm with Kant on this one, but definitely I agree that it's exceedingly difficult to cast any doubt on the idea that there is a subjective constitution of space and time.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Subjective as in not existing outside of the individual.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, basically, space and time are preconditions of our experience, and they are filters, right,
Yes.
through which we experience the world.
Yeah.
The question is, are there other things that correlate it? Because we use time in multiple senses.
Because like they could be.
Yeah, we use time in multiple senses, right? The most immediate
that's
one is Kantian time, or strict time, even if you like. For me, I would call it strict time.
There are philosophers that come after that do try to figure out what is beyond because they don't like Kant's answer. We just can't know it. Hegel performs like a subtractive move where he's like, okay, let's not say that there's something outside, but really we can cognize it ourselves. So like Hegel doesn't believe in the limits of reason that Kant will very much later on like draw, and he says, okay, let's try to go further and see if we can find what's really like behind, for example, or really any matter. That's Hegel's method of, you know, what are it's the method of the dialectic. How can we dialectically, you know, come to rationally know what is, you know, what he calls the notion with a capital N, which is like that basically the thing in itself.
Yeah.
For Kant, the notion of time outside of subjective experience is a big just question mark at best.
Well, except for time that is a model of experience, right? Because there's physical time and physical space.
Right, but that's not time.
Like Einsteinian.
Right, but that's all I'm saying, like the transcendent, like.
Right, but that's a different kind of time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
which
to
is a question
illustrate.
mark.
No, but that's my point to illustrate that we mean time in multiple different senses,
yes,
right?
yes.
So there is Kantian time, and I think it's very difficult to doubt that there is such a thing as Kantian time. That
Which was a
works
pretty big breakthrough, especially
in the way
time.
that Kant works,
Yeah.
right? The question is, what is there outside of it? Well, physical time, it seems like we need to accept relativity, right? It seems like we need to accept general relativity, and general relativity does not accord with our understanding of Kantian time.
Right.
But it can be a model in the same way that a four-dimensional thing, we model it onto
Yeah.
three-dimensional. Einsteinian relative time can be a model to predict our own future subjective experiences in Kantian time.
Yes.
But then the question is there also a somehow knowable noumenal time, basically?
That's what post-Kantians are really interested in.
What time? What kind of time?
Noumenal, meaning a thing in itself, transcendent,
like
transcending our experiences.
The
That
thing that's a
question Ben
question
had
mark.
earlier, which is that how could we subjectively experience change if objectively there was no change?
So would they? So like I know, like I don't know, but like would Einsteinian time be an empty concept of time?
No, it's not that
that's
concept.
it's what he was saying before. It's like that's our
Actually,
our prediction of-
because-
that's our model. of the
counterpoint.
physical
I
world.
think that it is an empty
Well,
concept,
well,
and this is why I
oh.
criticize Kant.
Well, because the reason, but when I came up with like, the idea of like the frozen universe, like you get from Einsteinian time, you get like the block universe where the future and past equally exist, and there's just like kind of like what we experience as time flowing is a perception, and it just emerges encoded in that, and what reality is there is no actual change.
Right. So I think that this actually does become a problem for Kant, because for Kant, of course, in order to have knowledge of X or blah, 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 you first need to have cognition of it.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have cognition, you first must have an intuition. But we evidently do not have any intuition of Einsteinian time.
We can't. Yeah.
We cannot
It's
possibly have it.
impossible.
It's impossible due to the laws of our constitution to have an intuition of Einsteinian time. Yet, we use it to accurately predict our own future experience.
Precisely.
So it seems like we do have knowledge that does not require intuitions.
No, I would just say it's a weird intuition.
is it into?
It's an intuition that he would not have been able to even like think of.
You have an intuition of being two different subjects experiencing two different times?
If we analyze reality in the way that Einstein has, then yeah.
Intuitions are not analytical by definition. They have to be given to you. You have to just experience it. You have to be
No,
capable.
not through analytical like reasoning, through synthetic a posteriori.
Well, that would be an empirical intuition of time, which we've already said that we couldn't make any universal, like it's not time anymore. But also, like just literally,
I guess then it is.
how do you imagine being two different subjects? Which would be necessary in order to have two different subjective experiences of time.
Don't scientists do that? Haven't they like?
No, they don't imagine it. They model it.
Well, I guess the model would be the intuition then, wouldn't it?
But the model is
The intuition exists outside of yourself.
but the model is an abstraction that does not
Yeah,
correlate.
it's an outer
accurately.
intuition, right? Not an inner.
But then is it an intuition? I guess then could we define those things, models, as just outer intuitions?
So that you need to have the physical model and rely on it almost magically. But then then it still doesn't seem
Is
like
this
they're
what
knowledge.
this might be, I don't know, this is like big speculation. I don't know if this is helpful, and after this we should probably continue because there's a lot. But there was something that, it was what we were making fun of way earlier, like in the introduction, where he was saying like there's like a pure science, there's like a separate area of like natural science where we can use a priori deduction.
Yeah,
This would probably be a case of that, right?
a case of that failing.
Failing?
Yeah, a case of Kant failing here, because
No,
according to
this
Kant,
is-
right?
He failed in his example, but if his example does have any fruit, maybe, or if it's fruitful, then maybe this is where it is.
I kind of want to reduce this argument to like propositions and a conclusion so that we can sort it out. So, proposition number one, right? For Kant, we only have knowledge if we possess an intuition linked with a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Proposition number two is that we only have an intuition of things which our sensibility is capable of
Receiving. Yeah.
Okay. Proposition 2, Proposition 3, we are not capable of receiving an intuition of relativity.
That's where I'm
relativity.
questioning, but continue with your.
Well, I mean, because again, that would require us to be two different subjects.
Which is what the theory holds, no?
Exactly, and that's why it doesn't rely on intuition.
Because even if we are two different
subjects,
intuition is not equal to observation.
It relates to intuition, but
yes.
But the intuition doesn't correspond to its object.
Why not?
Because, okay, how do we know relativity is true? Experiments that relate to a single subject with a single time. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That means that we do not have a corresponding actual intuition for relativity.
I don't see how that follows.
Well, because we don't.
It's not equal to observation.
Well,
intuition has to be given to you.
Well,
yes.
I feel like intuition does kind of have to be.
Are we given two different subjects?
Well, I mean,
according to this theory, yes.
No, but
right?
no. But you can't be given something by a theory. You have to directly experience it.
You can't.
That yeah. Well.
And we don't directly. I think the big part of relativity is like you can.
We're not experiencing it observationally, but.
No, you don't have an intuition of ultraviolet.
Well, you do. I think you do kind of have to observe a thing to have.
We do though.
What makes
not
you
directly observational, but through this scientific reasoning.
That's not an intuition.
That would be just working with categories, right?
Yeah. So I only know about I only know about ultraviolet through concepts. It's never been given to me directly.
But using intuitions, you can't get to that concept without going through intuition.
Sure, I need to relate and use intuitions, but that's not the same as having an intuition which corresponds to ultraviolet.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, then that's like relativity is like the ultraviolet in this.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. So relativity is like ultraviolet in that yes.
Okay, so then my theory that this is Kant's like special a priori science where you using the given intuitions and using the experience you can come up with a priori deductions of what is true about the natural world. Isn't that what we're doing?
Well, I mean, again, the things he says are true, but the natural world are just false.
Okay, the example he gives, but you said there's a way in which we know relativity is true. So wouldn't that be an example of what Kant's talking about, even though these examples...
No, but it's not a priori at all. It's empirical. We empirically know that relativity is true.
So the results of the experiments, we don't suddenly use like a priori cause and effect to draw or we don't take the conclusions of things and we don't notice an a priori connection there.
Well, it's not a priori because
it's not. That's what I'm asking. I don't know.
But by definition, right? Because it's using experimental data. The experimental data is ultimately some kind of empirical intuition.
The experimental data is.
Well, no, but then it's not. You said we don't have that empirical intuition of two different subjects.
I know we don't.
So is that an a priori conclusion?
Well, no, we're experiencing.
Oh, it's not.
We're experiencing the concept, not the thing, not.
But how are we deriving that concept? Is it an a priori derived concept or no?
Well, the concept of what?
Well, it's like
of the two different of relativity, like the two different subjects.
No, we're not. We don't have the a priori concept of relativity.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
I mean, if we did, then we would be able to figure it out without experiments.
We'd be like the squid monsters from Arrival. We'd be able to experience time as a nonlinear thing, which we don't.
Right.
Is that a bad example?
I think so. I mean, a good example. I think so, probably.
Because the whole thing in that movie is these are separate beings that
no,
they experience time.
Right. The beings that we were.
But my general point here is that through models, we have models which are linked necessarily to some kind of intuition. They refer to intuitions, in order to work. But we don't actually need to have a cognition of what we are thinking about.
Okay.
Like, which Kant says we need in order to have knowledge of a subject. Mm-hmm. But that clearly isn't the case.
Based Hegel. Hegel's right.
Okay. Cool. Well, I
just wanted to cover all bases.
Yeah, I really honestly haven't seen that in Hegel so far.
No, but I'm saying in Hegel's framework that's possible.
Sure, I think so.
Hegel allows
but I was kind of expecting that line of reasoning to turn up in Hegel, and it just doesn't.
Maybe not yet. I don't know. We haven't.
Well, that's true. Maybe not yet, but
I can see that easily.
I get the feeling that it won't.
All right. Well, we'll see about that.
Anyway, yeah, I guess we will see about that.
Okay, so that's that section. Long discussion of that long section. Who are you doing the thing with like number 2, the Roman numeral 2? I don't even know whose turn it is, but we can just probably.
I have no idea, but I guess so.
Yeah, let's just do that. We gotta move. We only have 4 pages left, I think. So.
Only 4 out of 7.
We're almost halfway. We're about to flip the page, so we're basically halfway done, roughly. Anyway, all right, let's motor.
For confirmation of this theory of the ideality of outer as well as inner sense, thus of all objects of the senses, as mere appearances, this comment is especially useful. That everything in our cognition that belongs to intuition, with the exception, therefore, of the feeling of pleasure and displeasure and the will, which are not cognitions at all, contains nothing but mere relations of places in one intuition, extension, alterations of places, motion, and laws in accordance with which this alteration is determined, moving forces. I don't really see what he's talking about there. Do you?
Hang on.
Good afternoon, Drew Library patrons. Thank you so much for stopping by the library this Friday afternoon. The time right now is 4:30. Want to give you a heads up, we're going to our Friday evening study hours at 5 p.m. Library closes at 8. Should you choose to stay, and we hope you do, you'll need to have your Drew Library ID card with you, or your Drew ID card with you. Use the door fob, so the doors will be locked at 10:05. Should you choose to leave between 5 and 8. Once again, study hours begin in a half hour. Library closes at 8 p.m.
Okay, so he's saying that.
I think we need to finish the
cognition-
demonstration.
Okay, sure.
I think we need to finish the demonstration now that I'm thinking about that.
Okay.
But what is present in the place, or what it produces in the things themselves, besides the alteration of place, is not given through these relations. Now, through mere relations, no thing in itself is cognized. It is therefore right to judge that since nothing is given to us through outer sense, except mere representations of relations, outer sense can also contain in its representation only the relation of an object to the subject, and not that which is internal to the object in itself. Which is the distinction between right and left is coming up in my mind. Mm-hmm. Because space is ordered self-wise, basically, and therefore does not concern the object in itself.
Yes, it's
because it's
the relation of the object
related to the subject,
yep.
right?
Okay.
And so left and right exist in space. Yes.
I have a question. So is the thing we're talking about that that the things we talk about space are relative to the position of the observer?
Yes.
Yes, that's
What
space.
about, because I know there are some cultures, you're correct, but there are some cultures I know that actually don't use right and left. They use directions in relation to themselves as a north, west, east.
Okay, so I think they're probably calling them different things.
Definitions in relation to themselves.
No, they I have no idea how it works. I know, but apparently there are peoples that what they do is they don't have left and right as concepts. When referring to something in relation to them, they use north, south, east, west. They never use left and right.
Right. Well, I think that's just a nominal
They just
thing.
aren't
That's
using words. They just don't have words for right and left.
But they're still. But the.
Oh, I guess I see what you're saying. But I thought you were doing the thing where it's like right and left change depending on the user. But like north. When I say north, I don't as I mean like as in like this is north of me. That's not what I mean. I mean as in like they always have a conception of where north is.
Oh.
Well, they're just not
That's still
using.
that's still dependent on like.
That just means that they're not using right or left. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it doesn't exist for them.
Oh, of course, yeah. Okay, that's true. That's true.
It doesn't mean that they would be incapable of using right or left.
True.
Which they would be if they were not subjectively related.
Yes.
But you could, of course, teach such a person who never used right and left to use right and left.
And they would be like, ah.
Yeah.
I don't use right and left most of the I'm terrible with right and left,
Yeah.
but like you can teach me to use it.
Yes.
Training.
I understand.
Much training you require, young Padawan. Cool. Yeah. So, was the original confusion you had as well cleared up in this?
Yes. So, it is exactly the same in the case of inner sense. It is not merely that the representations of outer sense make up the proper material with which we occupy our mind, but also the time in which we place these representations, which precedes the consciousness of them in experience and grounds the way in which we place them in mind as a formal condition, already contains relations of succession, of simultaneity, and of that which is simultaneous with succession, which is to say, of that which persists. Now that which, as representation, can precede any act of thinking something is intuition. And if it contains nothing but relations, it is the form of intuition, which, since it does not represent anything except insofar as something is posited in the mind, can be nothing other than the way in which the mind is affected by its own activity, namely the positing of its representation. Thus, the way it is affected through itself, i.e., it is an inner sense as far as regards its form. Everything is represented through a sense. What? Everything that is represented through a sense is to that extent always appearance. And an inner sense must therefore either not be admitted at all, or else the subject, which is the object of this sense, can only be represented by its means as appearance. Its means as appearance. Okay. Not as it would judge itself in its intuition as mere self-activity, i.e. intellectual. Any difficulty in this depends merely on the question of how a subject can internally intuit itself. Yet this difficulty is common to every theory. Consciousness of itself, apperception.
I did not know it was dropped. Babe, wake up! Perception dropped. It probably doesn't seem big now, but you'll see why we're freaking out later.
Consciousness of itself, apperception, is the simple representation of the I, and if all of the manifold in the subject were given self-actively through that alone, then the inner intuition would be intellectual. In human beings, this consciousness requires an inner perception of the manifold that is antecedently given in the subject, and the manner in which this is given in the mind without spontaneity must be called sensibility on account of this difference. The faculty for becoming conscious of oneself is to seek out, apprehend. This has been one paragraph.
Wall of text.
The faculty for becoming conscious of oneself is to seek out, apprehend that which lies in the mind. It must affect the latter. What? If the faculty for becoming conscious of oneself is to seek out or apprehend that which lies in the mind, it must affect the latter.
Which is the mind. So it must affect the mind.
And it can only produce an intuition of itself in such a way whose form, however, which antecedently grounds it in the mind, determines the way in which the manifold is together in the mind in the representation of time. There it then intuits itself, not as it would immediately self-actively represent itself, but in accordance with the way in which it is affected from within, consequently, as it appears to itself, not as it is. Nope, not even trying. Not even attempting.
We don't.
You can try if you like.
Okay.
I'm not even going to attempt.
Well, I don't want to rigorously go through that section. I'm going to try to pull out like the themes of what he's saying, so we can.
What is a manifold?
A manifold is like how do I explain manifold? It's kind of just like the field of existence? I don't know. Maybe.
Why does it have to exist in a field? That could be physics.
No, not like a physical field. Like,
A manifold is it's
it's like the plane of existence.
It's a space in which
No.
must exist.
it's all intuitions.
Manifolds and intuition.
No, it's not an intuition. It's all the intuitions.
Yeah.
So a manifold is all the intuitions.
Manifold is like the space time, empirical intuitions, everything. Like that's the manifold.
So the manifold is
It's like the
everything
intuitional plane of
synthesized
existence.
together to create the subjective human experience. Or
Nope.
preconditions for
No.
The preconditions of experience that are given to us rather than which emerge from us.
So it's
So
just
so the manifold is within Immanuel?
no. So the intuit these two.
It's all the intuitions.
The this and this. These together manifold.
Well, you pointed to intuition and intuition.
No, like empirical, like pure and empirical.
So all intuitions.
Yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So the preconditions for experience and then also all empirical intuitions create the manifold.
Qualia plus space
Right,
and
but those
time.
aren't. But pure intuitions are not all the preconditions for experience.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Pure intuitions and empirical intuitions.
Yes,
Right.
those as preconditions.
Right, those
Or-
are
but those
preconditions.
are
preconditions
yes,
for the manifold.
but it's
But they're
not
all of them.
They're not all the preconditions for experience. because
These
you
are
also
the
need
other parts.
Yeah, you need the preconditions for experience.
But this is not part of the manifold. This helps tie the manifold together, which we'll see later. But
Remember, by experience, we are talking about human experience,
Yes.
right? Self-conscious experience with apperception.
So then the manifold is the combination of pure intuitions, empirical
Yes.
intuitions, and
No. No,
This is
it's just the intuitions.
this has nothing to do yet with manifold. This will how this interacts with manifold will be
Well, if
later.
it ties it together, how is it not preconditioned for it?
No, it is.
It is. The
Okay.
manifold is, that's why the manifold is not all the preconditions of experience.
Because
Then what
it's-
is?
So the first thing you said
So
was,
this is the so this so
can
this,
I do this?
When I
Yes.
say preconditions for the manifold, I'm not saying preconditions. I'm
No,
really
what
saying
you said
defines the
was,
manifold.
what you said was preconditions for experience,
Yes.
right? And we said no.
No.
We said no because
Oh, it's
categories are also
preconditions for human experience.
Right?
Yes.
So the manifold is not the preconditions for experience because it only contains half of it, right?
It's the precondition for this part of human experience.
Yes, the
The part-
intuitive part.
Or the
The
animalistic part of
sensibility.
human experience.
Yes, sensibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say animalistic.
Yeah, the part
I
that
mean,
is not.
some animals might have apperception.
Of course, yes.
But-
this is what Schopenhauer makes a big point of.
Yes.
Which like dolphins or.
Sure, but suppose we have just like a fly. That
Yeah.
probably doesn't have apperception.
Yeah.
They don't have experience in the Kantian sense.
But they could have these.
Yes, but they have these, right? Probably. A jumble of confused sort of intuitions. And they're not so confused because they do have space and time. Right? I think a fly probably experiences space and time.
It does.
Well, they all have very
We-
basic categories.
We were making judgments of the subjective experience of animals. It's very difficult.
which
Yeah.
Thomas Nagel says, yeah, that's the fucking weird, but
But in our own experience, of
If we were
course,
to
we have
imagine it, so-
categories, right?
Yeah.
These are not, therefore, the complete set of preconditions for experience. Rather,
So
they are the
what-
material on which our categories and our understanding
Would
works.
Kant say that that's impossible to have that you can't that humans can't reduce their experience. We can't ever get rid of this.
No. He tries to say you can.
Because I only say that
Well,
because
because
why would you use the word
consider what he
experience
says.
to define
He says
all of
he says you can separate these and imagine them like in themselves, which we
Well,
don't think you
Well,
can.
if you try to, you're not doing it.
Well, yeah, and
But Kant thinks you can for
and
some
I
reason.
only say that because if that's not the case, why would you use the word just
No, because-
experience as the same as human experience?
Well,
Because that's what he's talking about throughout the book. That's
Again,
kind of
he's
like,
talking
not
about
concerned with
experience
animals,
with
like, that's not something he's
apperception.
even thinking of.
he's talking about experience in the normal, ordinary sense, which has apperception, right? In a normal, ordinary experience, I know that I am me,
Yes.
right? It is a self-conscious experience.
Yes.
So, an experience with some kind of self-consciousness, i.e., apperception,
Yes.
that Cartesian cogito, does not, or is not composed of merely the preconditions of intuition, but also the preconditions of the understanding.
So the manifold is the precondition for this half of experience.
Yeah.
Or the product of these.
Well, it's not even all just the preconditions. It's also the actual content.
It is the actual content because it's not. Well, I guess
The
Oh,
pure
right,
the
right,
pure
right.
intuitions are the
those
preconditions.
are preconditions, right? So I guess those things are preconditions to the manifold.
Right, and he calls basically the manifold. Well, the manifold, according to Kant, is composed of form and matter or content, right? And the matter or content is supplied in empirical intuition, whereas the form is given by pure intuition.
So what you get from like maybe like Zen Buddhism when you take it to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's potentially the object of it.
Yes.
I mean, mindfulness at least attends more closely to intuition than concept.
Yes.
That I will say.
I don't
Rather than like give a whole label on it,
Yeah.
mindfulness is an attempt to attend to intuitions without attaching concepts.
Yes.
That's what I'll say, rather than like making a broad judgment about Buddhism.
Yeah.
Because I get myself in trouble.
Yeah.
Buddhists in the comment.
But when you perform mindful meditation, right, you're supposed to be becoming aware of intuitions without attaching any kind of judgment to them.
Yes.
So in that case, you are attending to the manifold,
Yes.
so to speak, rather than applying categories to it insofar as
I
is
see.
possible.
And that's okay. So then manifold. Okay. And now I understand what manifold is. Just all intuitions.
Yes. Yes.
Ding ding ding.
That's what I said in the first
Oh.
place. It's like all intuitions. Okay, so the preconditions of experience. No. Wall of text.
Yeah.
So it's all intuitions. Yep.
I understand. Okay.
You're
No,
all
that's
good,
cool,
all good.
that's cool.
That's why we're doing this.
That's
partly,
cool.
at least. Okay. Based. Okay. So now what he's actually saying in this big block that is number 2, that last like the course of 3 fucking pages ish, or more like a page and a half.
It was a page and a half, but it was a page and a half paragraph of run-ons.
Yes. So just through mere relations, no thing is cognized. It is therefore right to judge that since nothing is given us through outer except mere representations of relation, outer sense can also contain in its representation only the relation of an object to the subject. Yes, so besides the subject, things aren't just relational. There are, which is what I think Leibniz would try to say. That's wrong, and we covered that. It's exactly the same with inner sense. It is not merely the representation of outer sense make a proper material with which we occupy our mind, but also the time in which we place these representations. Right, so representations aren't separate from time. We've covered that previously as well. Great, let's move on.
We'll take Leibniz too seriously.
Huh?
We'll take Leibniz too seriously.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, I went through a lecture on Leibniz and we're like, you need to take this seriously because Leibniz was a genius. Yeah, okay, but he was also a scholastic.
Mm-hmm.
He had his conclusions and then worked to try to make it work somehow.
Just like
He
Aquinas,
knew
yeah.
Spinoza was right, and he couldn't prove it wrong, so he came up with some sort of genius way to try to work around it, and it still doesn't work.
It failed, yeah. Yeah, I really like the doctor really tried to take us through that, and he did not just try, he did. He took us through it, and now it still fails. So based, okay, let's see. Grounds of place support. In addition, it already contains relations of succession. Okay, yes. So the outer sense precedes succession, and there's why succession can happen and simultaneity. Right.
The outer sense does not precede the inner sense. No way.
No,
What's the
that's
other sense?
The outer sense is space.
Okay.
The inner sense is time.
Oh no! It is not merely the outer sense. So it's not that it comes before. It's an equal thing, but it's separate because it's
Right, so space
okay.
is called the outer sense because objects outside of the subject are
But
related
time
to the
is
subject.
time is an internal.
Time is
intuition.
the inner sense in that both the subject and all objects in the manifold that the subject experiences are
Right.
related
So-
time-wise.
Okay, and he's basically saying that,
Therefore, space is the outer sense and time is the inner
yes,
sense.
and it's not as he's saying
We
here.
have internal space. Well, I guess you could say I feel like we do.
You don't have internal space.
No.
That's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor.
That's a metaphor. You can't relate yourself to... Where is the right and the left of your inner space?
What does that mean?
Exactly.
Exactly.
There's right and left out here.
Is one part of you adjacent to another part of you?
I guess okay. So when we're saying you, are we saying like this, like as if like
Not
this?
your body.
No, my body is not me.
It's
Okay.
No.
your apperception. Basically.
Your subjective experience itself.
Okay.
I mean, yes, so there's space inside your body, but to experience is your body, right? Your consciousness.
Consciousness. My consciousness. Okay. I see.
Where's the space inside your consciousness?
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's no.
It could be
no
imagined, but that's just imagined.
but that's an imagined
That's a
outer
concept.
Yes,
space.
concept.
Yeah, that's an imagination of outer space.
Yes.
It's not even. It's an empty concept, and which is.
Well, it's
Not
just
even
not even.
intuition
It
at
does.
all.
It's not even a concept. It's just a jumble of words.
Yes. Okay.
Space is not. There's no inner space.
Yes. Okay.
I mean,
so-
it's a metaphor.
But there is,
Yeah.
but outer space, he's kind of saying here, isn't the only thing that orders representations. It's also the inner sense of time, which gives succession and simultaneity. Great, we know that. Now that which representation can precede any act of thinking is intuition, right? We're saying that it precedes thinking, particularly thinking in the case of like applying categories to intuitions. The intuitions are precede that process. Great, we know that. And then he gets to the newer things where he starts talking about, the apperception, which I think, in answering your questions, we've pretty much covered. That's he says it here, it's a simple representation of the I. And if all that manifold self-actively were given to it alone, then the inner intuition would be intellectual. Wait. Right. So all of the manifold is not. So he's saying if it were the case that manifold, right, which is we just said is the collection of intuitions, if that were internal, then it would just be intellectual. It's not. There's something.
If it were spontaneously self-generated, then it would be intellectual.
Yes, but he's saying it's
not
not the
internal,
case.
right? Because time is internal,
Right. Okay. I'm
but it's
screwing
not
up words.
spontaneously self-generated.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not intellectual. It's perceptive.
What do you mean
Right.
spontaneously self-generated?
Like the categories are. Like the categories aren't given to us.
So this basically goes back to the old Aristotelian distinction between active and passive.
Mhm.
We passively receive these intuitions. Space and time, I don't have to do anything for space and time
It's
to
just
be
fucking
there.
there.
It's just there.
Yeah.
It's just there. Time passes regardless of what I do. In order to make any kind of judgment, I have to be active in some way.
Yes.
Therefore, it is spontaneous in the sense that it emerges from me rather than being given to me.
Yes.
That's
So
what
he's trying to argue against viewpoints that would say no, that this is space, the inner and outer intuitions, namely being space and time. I guess he's arguing against for some reason that it's the mistake that you could make that, oh no, that's inner, that's just me projecting. No, otherwise I would be intellectual, and for the reasons given above and in the previous sections as well. No, it's not. It's received. And then it goes on to say, human beings, this is required inner perception, manifold, blah blah blah, the subject. Right. So it's without spontaneity. So the mind without spontaneity is just sensibility, right? That's the only faculty that's left if you take away spontaneity. Faculty of becoming conscious of oneself lies in the mind, must also affect the latter. It can only produce an intuition of itself in such a way whose form, however.
Which, incidentally, is the root of Kant's strongest argument against the idea that there is no thing in itself and that everything is self-generated, which is the idea that, intuitions are not spontaneous, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're given to us.
Yes. Which is also, if you want to defeat Kant, you have to.
Isn't that a bit circular? Just saying, like he's saying, like his argument is just, how does he know that they're given?
You just have to attend to your own. This time, I think you really can attend to your own thoughts and figure it out. Like, I can't say, okay, time, stop. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
No.
Me neither. So that's basically his argument against
That's
idealistic monism.
Or that it just exists within against.
Yeah, but it's given to us, right? Yeah. We're passive in it, and therefore there has to be something outside of us in order for us to be active.
But whether or not that's noumenal and unknown is that's the controversial part.
Well, no, even for Fichte, there's still nothing outside of yourself, right? And
for Fichte,
Hegel,
yeah, but Fichte's not the end of the story.
Okay, but even for Hegel, in some sense, it's not outside of yourself.
Well, yeah, which is
it's not outside of consciousness, but consciousness isn't just subjective consciousness.
But subjective and objective consciousness are unified.
Yes.
That's spirit.
Yes.
Is
But
the unity
but spirit transcends just subject. Otherwise, we wouldn't
It can't transcend it without also being unified with it.
Yes, it's unified with it,
So
but,
I don't
but the
understand-
fact that it's unified means there's more there that was.
Well, all I'm saying is
comprehensible.
that in some sense there is monism in Hegel.
Oh, yes, in the sense, yes, that's correct. I think.
Yeah. So well, in some sense, right? The subject is the universe, and therefore, how is it possible that the subject is passive?
No, the subject
Because
isn't the universe because the universe is also composed of things outside of the subject.
But those are self-identical with the subject
Okay. Yes. Sure.
in
but,
spirit.
Yes, but okay. So you're correct, but I think the wording is misleading. Like.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how all of it works and how he puts it all together yet.
But the.
But it seems to be the crucial tension is this fact that there needs to be some kind of.
My point is that the noumenal, what Kant is conceiving of as the noumenal, is comprehensible for Hegel, and which is a greater part of spirit that transcends both subject and object because they're really not that different.
Sure.
Yeah.
But my point is ultimately the tension in Hegel that he needs to resolve in order to be some kind of monist is
This, yeah.
this
Yeah.
fact that like we have things given to us. We are in some sense passive.
But then we also spontaneous.
Right, and
It's not
so
all passive.
we are in some sense passive and in another sense active.
Yes.
Which is also the tension in Fichte. Fichte, of course, resolves it by saying, no, we assert our complete activity.
Yes.
Hegel is more subtle,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yes.
There's
And
a
more
very
complex, more
complicated,
complex.
there's
Yes.
some kind of complicated interplay.
Yes.
Which
Big
ultimately
enough
results in some kind of monism.
Yes. Spirit. Question?
I guess I don't know if I'm confused. I guess I'm like, is really like, is the end of the argument just that like, because I can't imagine time freezing, that therefore it must be given to me?
I mean, basically.
Yes. That's
Well,
the way
you
could present it.
can't have an argument about pure intuition, except through some kind of example that appeals to your intuition.
I guess so.
Which is
I
kind of
guess
the
I
ultimate
guess
proof,
There
I
must be
think.
something outside of myself.
Well, the
Outside of your
proof
subjective self, yes.
the proof goes subjective experience is composed of a passive and active element.
Yeah. I guess like how do you prove the active element?
By doing what you just said. It's
By
can I freeze time?
adding
No.
2 plus 2.
How does that prove activity?
Because I can choose, I have to do some kind of thinking, some kind of process in order to put 2 and 2 together and get 4. I mean, it's very simple for us now. We just intuitively go 4.
Yeah.
But not literally, it's not literally an intuition, it's more of a reflex. But let's do a different math problem. What's 67 plus 112?
67 plus 112.
See, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Thinking! You're active!
Yes, but I guess I mean in the sense, and I guess this could just be a very lame misunderstanding of Zen Buddhism, but like the idea that like you are not the category or the part that makes the judgments. You are the thing that watches them or experiences them.
You aren't anything in Zen Buddhism or in any Buddhism.
Yeah,
there's
no
you.
self-doctrine. Yeah.
It's a no self doctrine.
Yes,
And Atman.
but there is a
That would be
distinction
you're misunderstanding. It's a pretty typical confusion.
Yeah.
You're giving a Hindu doctrine as if it's Buddhist.
Yeah.
So in Hinduism, you are the consciousness which observes. However, you're not the mind even, because the mind is distinct from the consciousness,
Yeah.
from consciousness. But what was your question?
I don't know anymore.
Yeah, so
You're
there's-
wondering about the proof of activity.
right. The proof, right? So the proof that there is an active and a passive component. There's an active component because you just had to do math.
Yeah.
There's a passive component because you can't stop time.
Yeah.
So those are the conditions. I mean, like, there can't be an argument that doesn't appeal to your
I
own
guess,
subjective
like,
experience.
This is like an annoying skeptic thing, but couldn't I just be like, how do I know that like my activity isn't just an emergent thing? How do I know that that's me? Or you could just say, call it me. I don't know.
It's not relevant to the question, right?
It's-
There's a
it's
subject.
happening.
It's happening.
Yeah, I mean, you subjectively experience yourself as a subject. There's no self even for Kant, right?
Yeah.
We can't even say that there's like an enduring substance or anything. It's just that subjective experience there.
Is a
And
thing.
subjective experience
Functions
requires
this way.
it requires apperception, right? I think therefore I am.
Yeah.
Okay? So there's a subjective experience happening,
Yeah.
and there's an apperception that unifies it as one subjective experience.
Yes.
you can't doubt that by saying, what if it's an emergent property of material? Well, okay, it's still happening,
Yeah.
Okay.
right? So there's an active and a passive component, right? And if there is a passive component, it's difficult to see how we are, like, how you could be the root of all experience.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that.
Yes.
Cool.
All right. Moving on. No matter what. I guess I'll just read this. If I say, this is the Roman numeral 3 paragraph or section. If I say, in space and time, intuition represents both outer objects as well as self-intuition of the mind, as each affects our senses, that is, as it appears, that is, not to say that these objects would be mere illusion. For in the appearance of the objects, indeed, even properties that we attribute to them are always regarded as something really given, and only insofar as this property depends on only the kind of intuition of the subject in the relation of the given object to it, then this object as appearance is to be distinguished from itself as object in itself. Thus, I do not say that bodies merely seem to exist outside of me, or that my soul only seems to be given, if I assert that the quality of space and time, in accordance with which, as condition of their existence, I posit both of these, lies in my kind of intuition, and not in these objects in themselves. It would be my own fault if I made that which I should count as appearance into mere illusion. Which is a big-ass footnote. Do we want to read that right now?
No.
Okay. Base. But this does not happen according to our principle of the ideality of all our sensible intuitions. Rather, if one ascribes objective reality to those forms of representation, then one can avoid thereby transforming them into mere illusion. For if one regards space and time as properties that, as far as their possibility is concerned, must be encountered in the things in themselves, and reflects on the absurdities in which one then becomes entangled, because to infinite things that are neither substance nor anything really, inheriting in substances must nevertheless be something existing, indeed the necessary condition of the existence of all things, which also remain even if all existing things are removed, then one cannot well blame the good Berkeley. I'm not expecting that. If he demotes bodies to mere illusion, indeed even our own existence, which would be made dependent in such a way on the self-subsisting reality of a non-entity such as time, would be transformed along with these into mere illusion, an absurdity of which no one has yet allowed himself to be guilty.
Classic Kant, misrepresenting literally everyone except Leibniz.
Lol! And maybe Wolf. I don't know. Okay.
So yes, Berkeley, he says, of course, that Berkeley asserts that objects are mere illusions, which is not the case. He asserts exactly what Kant is asserting.
Yeah.
That they exist
The opposite,
for a
they're
subject.
real.
That
Yep.
they are subjectively real.
Right. So that's good. So that's what Kant is doing in this big ass, really wordy section, is that he's saying that don't confuse appearance with illusion, because that's something that like Descartes, I think, is mainly was
I guess he also
responsible.
doesn't misrepresent Locke. Sorry, that's a tangent.
Maybe, sure. But anyway, yeah.
But yes, don't confuse appearance with illusion, because there's such a thing as subjective reality.
Yes, he's saying that subjectivity is real because intuitions are real filters, even though they don't allow us to access the thing in itself. And this is where I think more maybe optimism can be found in Kant, that I originally was luckily able to interpret, because a lot of people get sad. They're like, oh fuck, I want the thing in itself, can't have it. Kant says, don't worry, it's still real. It's not illusory as maybe someone like Descartes would have you think. It's just, it is being filtered, but in a real way. There isn't nothing illusory about this process of filtering via intuition.
Well, the real illusory distinction, it depends on how you define real and reality, of course. So for Kant, what makes it real and why it's absurd to say it's an illusion is because it's enduring and predictable and will continue to be subjective experience whether you believe in it or not, right? Reality is that which does not go away once you cease to believe in it, right?
Yeah,
That's
belief versus knowledge. Right?
Exactly. So according to Kant, we can't you can't snap away the illusion of subjective experience in any way. It's going to persist. It's going to act according to certain subjective laws. So it's real. It's not an illusion.
Yeah, this isn't some like incoherent like dream or anything like Descartes would try to. Because Descartes, right? That was one of his main questions in his meditations. Like, how do I know that this is real and this isn't a dream? Well, I guess in some way this is a response to that. Maybe not the exact one that Descartes was looking for, but I think it definitely relates to it at least a bit in the ways that we just described. So that's really it, I think, for that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think so if there are no questions, we can move on. Do you want to read this fourth point here in this section?
In natural theology, where one conceives of an object that is not only an object of intuition for us, but cannot even be an object of sensible intuition for itself, one is careful to remove the conditions of time and space for all of its intuition, for all of its cognition must be intuition and not thinking, which is always proof of limitations. But with what is right can one do? But with what right can one do this if?
But with what right can one do this if one has antecedently
made both of these into forms of things in themselves, and indeed ones that, as a priori conditions of the existence of things, would remain even if one removed the things themselves. For as conditions of all existence in general, they would also have to be conditions of the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
If one will not make them into objective forms of all things, then no alternative remains but to make them into subjective forms of our kind of outer as well as inner intuition, which is called sensible because it is not original, i.e., one through which the existence of the objects of intuition is itself given, and that so far as we can have insight can only pertain to the original being. Rather, it is dependent on the existence of the object. Thus, it is possible only insofar as the representational capacity of the subject is affected through that.
This is fallacious.
This is what?
This is fallacious. The fallacy here is a false dichotomy. He says basically he says explicitly, if one cannot make them into objective forms of all things, i.e. them being space and time. Mm-hmm. If you can't make them the objective form of anything whatever, then there's no alternative but to make them into subjective forms of our kind of outer and intuitions. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's alternatives.
To space and time?
No. So he's saying there's two possibilities. Space and time are objective conditions of everything, or they are only subjective experiences of our cognition.
Would the alternative be that there are the subjective and then there's the...
the easiest alternative, the traditional alternative for Aquinas, no, space and time are the forms of physical things. Objectively. Why is that so hard?
What does that mean?
Well, like exclusively
Well, so for Aquinas, right? For example,
I'm not super familiar with Aquinas.
God is outside of space and time.
Right.
But space and time objectively exists.
Yeah.
Because all the physical things are inside of space and time. They're not it's not a subjective condition of experience. It's an objective thing.
Oh, okay. I was confusing objective and transcendent.
So then how does Kant show that they are that they're subjective, or does he not?
He does. He already did. But he's making another argument, and this particular argument is very fallacious.
Yeah.
Because he's just saying that there's no alternative besides it's subjective or it applies to everything.
Oh, right. So Aquinas is...
So, I mean, just take an example. The ocean. Everything is underwater or water is a subjective experience. Obviously, that's not true.
There's things above water. Right?
There are things above water.
Mm.
It's not even hard to point out the fallacy here.
So then how did Kant show non-fallaciously that?
Earlier? So we said that basically the geometrical demonstration, right?
Okay.
For example, you can't do geometry. So if space and time are objective conditions
Yes.
only, then we can't have them before experience,
Yes.
right? Because they wouldn't be in ourselves.
Yeah.
So then we would need to we would have empirical intuitions of space and time.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, then how are we supposed to do geometry?
Yeah.
Because empirical intuitions only lead to empirical judgments,
Yeah.
which are never universal or necessary.
I see.
But geometric judgments are universal and necessary.
Yes.
Therefore, space and time must be pure intuitions, which is to say that they are part of our subjective constitution.
I see.
So that's one of the ways he showed that space and time are part of our constitution.
Okay.
This is another argument, it's just fallacious.
Wait, so for its conditions of generally, because he's saying that you can't. Basically, what he's trying to do, right, is he's saying God can't transcend space and time. Is the argument he's making?
No, God does transcend space and time.
Right, but he's saying that conception of God is wrong because
He's saying that if space and time were objective,
Mhm.
how could God transcend them? There is no problem there.
Oh, but he thinks there's a problem there.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
there is no problem. Like, if we suppose that an object exists.
Well, no, but yeah, because if they are objective, then you can't transcend them, correct?
Well, yeah, because then
No.
it would be true.
They just have to. Objective simply means that they exist outside of our subjective experience. That does not mean that all things are bound by them.
I mean, they.
Well, for Kant they are, because what else is there? For
What do you
Kant.
What do
For
you
Kant, there is nothing else.
But what?
But the options he gives here, either objective or subjective. There's no third option you get.
No, but they don't. So they're
Kant.
objective. That does not mean. Not everything which is objective has to apply to all objects.
Yes, it does. That's what objective means.
No, it doesn't.
Well,
What does objective mean?
universal.
No, it doesn't. Suppose let's turn the wheel back.
Oh,
and
because
be
God
naive.
isn't an object.
No.
Oh.
Let's
Okay.
turn the wheel back and be naive realists.
Okay.
Right? Things like air and water objectively exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's still a possibility according to Kant, right? Because we don't know the noumenon, so it could correspond one-to-one, literally.
Oh, okay.
Right? That's a possibility.
Mhm.
So let's take that to be true. Be naive realists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Water objectively exists. Is everything in water? Does water apply to everything?
No.
So just because it's objective doesn't mean it applies. Objective does not mean universal.
Oh, okay.
I see.
Well, okay. Well, I guess we haven't gotten there. Okay, but we are going to get to why Kant thinks that like reason is there, because it's not just that he's being naive; is that he thinks there's a limit to reason, that we can't do things like this.
What do you mean? Well, yes, but no. I'm saying the naive assertion is...
Okay, in this instance, I guess he's being naive.
The naive assertion here is if space and time are objective conditions,
Mhm.
they therefore must be universal for everything whatever.
Right, but
But that doesn't follow.
Right. Okay, I see that now. Right.
That just doesn't follow.
Yes.
There could be objective conditions that only correspond to certain classes of things.
Yes. Sure. Okay, I get that now. Okay, so he's confusing objectivity and universality.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. And I was too. Okay. Oopsies.
Whoopsies.
I mean, when I try to understand a philosopher, so I just like try to take what they're saying to be true, just so I can understand it, and then I continue to take it to be true for too long. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just not hard if you think about like how people usually think about God. There's a physical world, and then there's God outside of it. The physical world objectively exists, but it's one kind of existence which is limited, and then there's a higher kind of existence. It still objectively exists. It's just not universal for everything, whatever.
Yes.
That's
Which Kant even admitted earlier. He said there may be beings that this is for human beings.
Sure, but what Kant does effectively is say, I mean, he just implies that, I think Kant has an idea of how the world is, noumenally, which he doesn't admit, but is implicit, which is that there is the subjective world of noumenon, and then there is God, and that's the thing in itself, and there's nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Even though he does admit that there may be other beings.
Which could that be him
have different
trying to
Right, exactly. But he that because he thinks that way, it's the cracks show in his thinking.
Okay. Yes.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So with that said, we can continue with this.
It is
point
also
forward.
necessary for us to limit the kind of intuition in space and time to the sensibility of human beings. It may well be that all finite thinking beings must necessarily agree with human beings in this regard, though we cannot decide this. Yet, even given such universal validity, this kind of intuition would not cease to be sensibility, for the very reason that it is derived, not original, and thus not intellectual intuition, which for the ground already adduced seems to pertain only to the original being, never to one that is dependent as regards both its existence and its intuition, which determines its existence in relation to given objects. Although the last remark must be counted only as an illustration of our aesthetic theory and not as the ground of its proof. So basically, this is, again, what we just said. Kant sort of implies here, although he admits that he can't prove it, that there's a noumenal world which is the same for all finite beings, and then there's God, who is a pure intellectual intuition. I think that's what Kant believes. He knows that he can't prove it. And he explicitly says that he believes in God, of course. But the tricky
that's
part...
a big different thing. That's like practical reason.
Right, but he says that he believes that.
Yes.
What I'm saying that he doesn't explicitly say that he believes, which he definitely does, is that there is no other subjective constitution outside of... There's just the subjective constitution for human beings, right?
But no, well, he does kind of admit that it's possible.
No, but I mean, like what he's saying is the subjective constitution of human beings probably also applies to aliens. That's the way he thinks of it, right?
Well, why do you... say
Okay,
that?
actually, here's what I'm trying to say. He believes that there are subjective constitutions and the thing in itself. The thing in itself is only God.
Maybe. I don't know.
That's
I don't know enough about how he thinks
No,
about the thing
I
itself.
think that's the way he's thinking, because if he didn't, then he would easily be able to admit, oh, there might be other things besides God that are subjective to space.
So it's from this first paragraph in the number 4. That's
Yes.
Okay. I'm following now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just finish this out. Here we now have one of the required pieces for the solution of the general problem of transcendental philosophy. How are synthetic a priori propositions possible? Namely, pure a priori intuitions, space and time, in which, if we want to go beyond the given concept in an a priori judgment, we encounter that which is to be discovered a priori and synthetically connected with it, not in the concept, but in the intuition that corresponds to it. But on this ground, such a judgment never extends beyond objects of the senses and can hold only for objects of possible experience.
Yay!
Yay!
That's the Transcendental Aesthetic. Let's fucking go! Oh, I've wanted to finish that for like months now. Okay, it's done. Yeah, basically he says, so Transcendental Aesthetic, what is it? It's for objects of the senses. It can only hold for objects of possible experience. Woo!
Transcendental Aesthetic. Space and time, that's just like your opinion, bro. But you need to have that opinion, otherwise you couldn't think anything.
Yes, it's a necessary opinion.
God. That's the summary.
God.
Why is it an opinion?
Because
It's not literally an
itself.
opinion. It's an aspect of your subjective experience.
I see.
I was just like trying to
And
summarize it as shortly and
what
stupid.
aspect of it is it? It's of the objects of the senses. It can only hold for objects of possible experience. That's the aspect. So, yay. So we did that. So that, and now we're gonna get into the logic, which goes into the other part, which is of the understanding that deals with concepts and logic and all the fun, spontaneous things, which I find infinitely more not infinitely, but much more interesting than the given stuff, which is what we've been doing this whole time. So this has been really long. I think we covered literally everything. I don't know if there are many post remarks. Probably not. No questions. No. All right. This might actually be the longest recorded Kant study to date, but thank God it's worth it. We finished it. Next up is the Transcendental Logic, which is the second part of the doctrine of Transcendental Doctrine of Elements. Based.
I want to know what the person who walks in and sees Lovecraft, Zen Buddhism, most shit, i.e. squirrel, is gonna think.
Yeah, we have a board. Maybe I'll take a picture and like edit this into the. We have a board. Dear editing Matt, please don't forget to put this in. Although I might, so my bad if I do. comment if you want to see the board if I'm too lazy or forgetful to put it in the video. If you're even watching still. I don't blame you. Clicked off your God. All right, we'll see you next time for the transcendental logic. Have a good one, folks.